Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. This is Rowan Chambers, broadcasting from what's left of the Hightower Estate bunker, though it hasn't felt like a bunker in a long time. If you're hearing this, then the mast we rebuilt from scavenged scaffolding and half-melted wiring still holds against the wind. If the mountain hasn't shifted, if the repeater dish hasn't frozen over again, then maybe, just maybe, this signal still carries. 5 years ago, I spoke into this microphone and called out to ghosts. 31 souls answered. We walked out of the smoke of high pines and carried what little we had into these concrete walls. We thought it would be sanctuary. We thought silence, for once, would mean safety. We were wrong. I've spent enough nights whispering about what came after, about the bitter winters, the failed repairs, the thinning food lines. But I haven't told you how it truly ended, how it began to unravel, not in chaos, but in something colder, calculated, slow. I've put it off, not because memory failed me, but because some truths dig deeper when spoken aloud. Some wounds reopen just from the shape of a name. But I owe you more than fragments and weather reports. So if you're still out there, piecing together the ash and the rot, trying to understand how it all fell apart, then you need this part of the story. We weren't starving. We weren't overrun. But something inside had cracked. We still numbered 24 strong, but what we'd lost wasn't bodies. It was faith. In each other. In what we were building. Meredith had turned this place into something it was never meant to be. Not a haven, not a home. A citadel, bristling with suspicion. Surveillance rooms had become sealed observation chambers. The dorms were broken down into monitored cells. Even the greenhouse, once a place of light and growth, was sealed under steel plating and UV arrays, masking it from the outside world. She said it was security, but it wasn't. It was fear dressed in steel. And that's where it starts. When we arrived at the outer approach, we didn't come to fight. We came with our hands open. That morning, I stood on the weather-split concrete, where the Hightower Road cut through the pine curve. We were maybe 50 yards from the outer gate. Above us, the drone towers were still active. Some had solar retrofit modules. Others pulled current from what I guessed were geothermal patches still running beneath the eastern ridge. I had the signal flare tucked into my coat. Blue smoke. Non-combat signal. I waited for the drone buzz to stabilize before I fired it. We all stood in silence. Brant carried the long flag with the white cross on black canvas. Clara was with me, holding the steel satchel of radio schematics, water filters, and trade maps. Even May had volunteered to come. Her joints stiff from a winter bout of infection. She'd survived, but barely. For half an hour we waited. The outer cameras tracked us. I knew the lens system, designed it, long ago. No one came. Then the intercom hissed. Her voice was unmistakable. "Rowan, go home." I stepped forward. "We are home. Let us in." "You abandoned this place," Meredith said. "I protected it. You don't get to walk back in and act like you never left. You closed the doors on the world. And you opened them to death." It wasn't rage in her voice, not even bitterness, just cold finality. "Go," she said again, "before I stop warning you." The line cut. We pulled back half a mile to the ridgeline and set camp in the tree-strewn lot where the fuel depot used to be. It was gone now, nothing left but the blackened circle and some scorched tanks tipped into the ravine. I set up the radio in the old inspector's trailer, ran a coaxial line to the welded antenna we carried on the wagon, and spent the night listening to static. We had to decide what came next. That night, we argued under breath. Clara said we should leave and try south. Brant wanted to press the main gate. May, she didn't say anything, just stared at the bunker silhouette in the moonlight. I couldn't believe it had come to this. My sister, my blood, had turned a haven into a citadel and locked the door on the last good people I knew. By morning, we knew she wasn't going to open the gates. So we tested the outer perimeter. The motion sensors had been rerouted, triggered only after sustained movement across the fence line. The old warning system was gone. That meant Meredith didn't want deterrence. She wanted silence until the last moment. The fence was live. 5,000 volts running through the mesh. We saw what happened when a bird landed wrong. Gone in a blink. But the ventilation shafts under the eastern maintenance line, still there. We'd used them before, 10 years earlier, when I helped build the system. We used to call them the steel vanes, narrow ducts with heat exhaust bypasses and aluminum padding to prevent echo bleed. Perfect for moving maintenance crews when the main elevators were locked. The problem? They weren't mapped anymore. Meredith had purged every internal schematic from our backup drive the day we left, so we'd have to trace the ducts blind. That night, a team of 5 went in. Brant, Eileen, Seema, Caleb and me. We carried gas masks, red light torches, climbing harnesses, and 2 old-school duct maps printed from a maintenance log I found in my satchel. It wasn't complete. That was the risk. The crawl took 6 hours. Inside the ducts we moved one at a time. Temperature rose fast. Seema nearly passed out from heat stress near the 3rd junction, and Caleb had to pour water across the lining to cool her down. At one point, we heard movement, metal on metal behind us, but nothing followed. When we reached the shaft leading into subsector B, we found the access vent sealed shut. Someone had welded the inner panel from the inside. The welds weren't clean. They were jittery, uneven, too hot in some places, barely bonded in others. That told us everything. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't planned. It was panic. Whoever sealed it didn't expect anyone to come this way, or they didn't think we'd still be alive to try. We didn't speak. Brant stepped forward with the torch. The hiss of plasma lit the crawl space in ghost blue. It took 40 minutes to cut through, the air growing sharper with every pass. That chemical ozone bite soaked into everything. My coat, my gloves, my breath. Years later, I can still smell it when the wind shifts wrong. When we dropped through the opening into the corridor, alarms began. Not the standard sirens. No rising whine, no mechanical bark. Just a low, pulsing tone, like sonar on loop. A spatial hum that rattled the walls and set teeth on edge. She knew. She knew we were in. We hadn't even touched the main door, and already Meredith had eyes on us. We hit the floor running, torches down. 10 seconds to get bearings. Subsector B, once the old utility and waste wing, hadn't seen regular foot traffic in nearly a decade. I hadn't walked those grates since I was in my 20s, back when the bunker still felt like a project worth building. But the moment my boots hit that rust-worn metal, my legs remembered. Not my mind, my muscles. The path to the filtration hub, the incline where the drainage pumps used to rattle, the spot where you had to duck or crack your skull on a pipe brace. All of it came back in flashes, like dream fragments rebuilding into something solid. But the air was wrong. It wasn't the heat or the damp. It was the sound, or the lack of it. There used to be a constant mechanical chorus down there. Flow regulators, thermal exchangers, hydraulic gate shifts. Now there was just a hollow buzz, and that tone pulsing through the frame. The whole corridor felt like a dying lung, still trying to breathe, each exhale weaker than the last. The emergency strobes didn't spin like they were supposed to. No rotation, no scatter pattern. Instead, they pulsed. Slow, deliberate. 1 second on, 1 second off. Meredith had rewritten the control script. It was deliberate, psychological. The effect was worse than chaos. It created moving shadows where there were none, made the walls crawl, turned every pipe joint into a silhouette waiting to step forward. We kept our torches angled low, barely above our boots, just enough to see each other's ankles and the path ahead. Any more than that, and the shadows turned traitor. The cameras had been repositioned. Most weren't pointed at key entries like they were during my tenure. Instead, they were aimed down corners, at dead-end halls, at points of convergence where hallways split. Classic ambush zones. It wasn't surveillance anymore. It was behavioral control. She didn't just want to see what happened. She wanted to funnel it. We took a left at the split junction near the maintenance battery wall. That's where we hit the first trap. It was a pressure plate, probably scavenged from a mining operation, about 6 inches wide and completely buried under dust. Caleb nearly stepped on it, but I caught the glint of a sensor diode under his boot just in time. We traced the trigger wire back along the baseboard. It led into a repurposed coolant pipe that had been rigged as a directional mine casing. A shell filled with steel ball bearings and black powder. Not enough to kill all of us, but it would have blinded whoever took point and set off every alarm in the wing. We disabled it, but it cost us time. The oxygen mix in that part of the bunker was wrong, slightly heavier. You wouldn't notice at first, but after 40 minutes, you'd feel your movements slow, like you were wading through something thick. Meredith knew that. She'd tweaked the filtration systems in certain sectors to wear intruders down. That's how calculated she'd become. When we reached Junction Delta, the radio went dead. Not static, not signal loss, just silence. I checked the handheld, fully charged, antenna extended. No damage. Switched to alternate frequency. Nothing. That's when Seema said it, half whispered, "We're being blocked." She was right. Meredith had installed local jammers. She didn't want signals getting in or out. I realized then, we weren't on a scouting op anymore. This wasn't infiltration. This was survival. We regrouped by the old geothermal control room. Most of the heavy equipment was still in place. Control panels, breaker boxes, ventilation manifolds. But someone had welded thick bars across the doors, and the viewing windows were shattered. Inside the room, we saw scorch marks on the ceiling. A fire had broken out there recently. The metal walls were blistered. On the far side, beneath a collapsed vent shaft, we saw a boot. Just one, half crushed, no foot in it. We didn't linger. At that point, the objective changed. Getting to the core wasn't possible without backup, so we shifted plans. Try to reach the outer armory and use its passage to loop around toward the service elevators. If we could disable the secondary power relay there, we could shut down at least half the internal systems and force Meredith to route power manually. That would give the surface crew time to approach the front gates without being immediately turned into vapor by the automated turrets. The corridors were tighter past that point. No natural light, just emergency strips running along the floor, red pulsing every 3 seconds. That's when we found the second trap, and this one wasn't mechanical. It was a person. Eileen stopped at the sound of metal dragging. At first, we thought it was one of ours, maybe one of the patrols who'd gotten lost during the scuffle. But then we saw him, one of Meredith's loyalists, probably a late 30s guard from the internal garrison. His uniform had been burned through along one shoulder. There was dried blood down one arm. He was dragging a broken rifle with a cracked stock, and his eyes were bloodshot, ringed with black. Not infected, just broken. He looked at us without flinching. Then without a word, he pulled something from his coat. Seema raised her weapon. "Don't!" It was a photo, folded in half, worn through the middle. A woman and a child, smiling. He held it up to us, just for a second, then let it drop. Then he knelt, placed his hands behind his head, and waited. We didn't shoot him. We bound his wrists, pulled him to the side, and checked his belt. No explosives, no concealed blades, just a crumpled ration bar, a half-used med patch, and a cracked keycard labeled Access Tier 2. He never spoke. Not once. Even when we asked his name, he just kept staring at the floor. I remember thinking, this isn't about loyalty anymore. These aren't soldiers. They're ghosts. We left him there, in a side alcove, tied to a support pipe. I don't know if he ever made it out. We made it to the service elevator shaft. The door was sealed. I knew the override code. I typed it in. The panel blinked twice, then redlined. Meredith had changed the code. I tried a dozen combinations. Then I heard it. Not a voice, not a siren. A scrape, from the shaft. I leaned in and turned the flashlight into the gap. Nothing. Then, from deep inside, maybe 5 levels down, I saw something move. Pale, fast, crawling. We pulled back. Not infected. Something worse. We retreated 2 junctions back and sealed the corridor behind us with an arc weld. It wouldn't hold long, but it gave us time. We'd lost the element of surprise. Meredith knew our location, Her systems were tracking us through internal heat sensors. We had to choose, push deeper, or find another way out. Brandt wanted to fall back. Seema argued to hold position and try to tap into the internal comms. I told them neither would work. We had to move. Now. We moved toward the upper corridor junction using the emergency stairwell access between subsector B and the upper halls of the command dome. The stairwell itself had been resealed with a magnetic lock, one that looked like it had been pulled from a repurposed vault door. Not standard issue. Someone had gone to extreme lengths to isolate that section of the bunker. Probably Meredith. She'd taken the paranoid architecture of the high tower systems and turned them into a breathing labyrinth. But every system, no matter how sealed, had an access layer. I remembered an old maintenance trick from back when we used to bypass diagnostics during simulations. We ran a makeshift magnetic induction spike through the lock plate using a portable battery and coiled copper from a stripped motor casing. Brandt did the soldering. Seema held the plate steady. When the charge burst, the door popped, just enough to slip a crowbar in. We didn't speak when the door creaked open. There was no need. The air that poured in was cold and stale, artificially chilled, not just abandoned. It tasted metallic, with a faint hint of sterilizing agents. Someone had cleaned the upper levels recently, scrubbed them in fact. A thin sheen of antiseptic residue shimmered on the floors beneath the overhead LEDs. Even the vent grills looked freshly filtered. That wasn't for health. That was to remove trace evidence. Meredith wasn't just securing her territory. She was erasing the history inside it. The layout above hadn't changed much from the original high tower schematic. Hallways still ran in concentric arcs from the command hub. The floors still bore the same dull grey epoxy, and the ceiling plates still showed the embossed serial numbers and RFID panel notches I used to memorize. But the mood had shifted entirely. Every surface now was covered in subtle additions, scratched-in numbers, painted directional sigils, old biometric tags overwritten with red paint or marker. She'd divided the bunker not by sector, but by faction. It wasn't a safe house anymore. It was a war map. We passed through the former communal kitchen, now empty save for a few open cupboards and stacked crates of sealed protein concentrate. No heat signatures. No power draw from the ovens. Everything had been shut off. Resource conservation? Maybe. But it felt more like Meredith had simply relocated all function to her inner circle and left the outer areas to rot. We reached the operations wing at roughly 0730. The outer bulkhead to the central control room, the same place where I used to monitor surface activity and oversee signal boosts, was sealed, not just by locking plate, but by a makeshift barricade of furniture, welding, and cabling. A hasty job, but enough to make passage impossible without a loud breach. That told me two things. First, she was in there. Second, she was expecting us. But the corridor across from the sealed door caught my attention. The one marked as Secondary Briefing 3A. That room had been used only once during the early years of the High Tower project, a place for private meetings between contractors and clients, mostly non-essential, but it connected via an air duct to the secondary ventilation shaft leading into the control dome. It was unlocked. We slipped in, weapons drawn but lowered, eyes scanning. Inside, it looked like a museum exhibit frozen in time. A dust-covered table, empty datapads, chairs with tags still clinging to the backs. The far wall bore the original Hightower family crest, tarnished now and pocked with rust. I found the vent access behind the comms display, tucked where it always had been, still bolted, but no welds. I slid it open slowly, listening for any sound from the other side. Nothing but distant humming. Brandt slipped through first, then Seema. I followed last. The shaft was tight. Barely enough room to breathe, much less move. It felt like crawling through a metal throat. The air grew warmer the closer we got. Then we reached the grate. Below us, the main control room, and Meredith. She stood with two guards flanking her, both armed, but not attentive. Their weapons were slung, relaxed. They didn't expect company through the ducts. No one ever did. From our angle, we could only see part of her face, lit by the soft glow of the master terminal. She was speaking quietly into a headset, issuing commands I couldn't quite make out. Behind her, The main screen flickered with a topographic map, real-time feed of the outer approaches. She was watching us. The signal flares we'd used, the fallback positions, the outer shifts, all logged and tracked. Then, something caught my eye on the screen. Not the map, the secondary feed, a countdown. I didn't recognize the code, but I knew the format. Automated systems override, full system cycle reboot, 23 minutes remaining, and the command console wasn't targeting us. It was rerouting power to the dome entrance. She was going to flood the upper levels. Gas, that was her contingency. A total sweep of the air systems, likely using halothane or a modified compound pumped through the vent lines, and the control room was sealed airtight. We had less than half an hour. I signaled to Brandt. He nodded. Seema checked her timer and set a beacon to signal the fallback team. Then I saw the second figure on the screen. Me, a still image. Bunker log footage from 10 years ago, just after I'd left. She'd saved it. Not out of nostalgia, not for security, but because to her, I was still the problem, even in memory. Brandt mouthed the question, "Do we breach?" I nodded. We backed up 3 paces, primed the thermal cutter, and began to slice through the grate. It took 6 minutes. Too long. The moment the seal dropped, the room lit up with alarms. The 2 guards reacted fast, faster than we'd hoped. One drew a sidearm and opened fire at the vent. Brandt fell back, scraped along the arm, but still moving. Seema dropped through first, landed on the edge of the terminal deck, and rolled behind the console. I went second. The moment my boots hit the floor, I raised my weapon and fired. The guard nearest the far station dropped. The second turned, too slow, and Brandt finished him. Meredith didn't move. She stood by the terminal, staring at the screen. Then she turned, slowly, and looked at me like we were just 2 people meeting after a long time apart. She said one word, "You're late." Then she pressed the console. The outer flood began. Seema rushed to the station and tried to abort the purge cycle. The system was locked, biometrics only. Meredith was the only one who could stop it. I advanced slowly. She raised a hand, not in surrender, but in caution. "You think this place is yours?" she asked. "It was never mine. It was meant for everyone. That's why it failed." Behind me, I heard the gas alarms kick in across the lower corridors. If the fallback team hadn't moved, they were already down. "Stop it," I told her. "Right now." "You left," she said. "You walked away. I stayed. I built something." "You built a cage. Better a cage than a coffin." She reached for the secondary console. I fired. Not to kill, but to stop her. The round hit the console, sparked. Metal screamed. She dove behind the station. Brandt followed her. I shouted at him to hold back, but he was already over the rail. The fight lasted 30 seconds. Gunfire, screams, then silence. Brandt staggered back, bleeding from the shoulder. Meredith didn't come back up. When I reached her, she was still breathing, just barely. She looked at me, coughed once, and then said something I'll never forget. "I didn't lock you out because I hated you." "Then why?" "Because I knew you'd come back." Then her eyes closed. The gas purge aborted. Seema found the manual override key in Meredith's coat. Too late for some of the others, maybe. But the upper levels would survive. We sealed the room, patched Brandt's wound, and began sweeping for survivors. I didn't speak for hours. There was too much left unsaid. We should have left through the upper stairwell. We should have doubled back the moment we secured the dome. We should have had a second team watching the main corridor junction, or checked the status of the auxiliary defense logs. That's what I kept thinking later, over and over, when I tried to make sense of what happened next. But there's a point during any retreat when time becomes water, rushing past, slipping through your grip no matter how tight you think you're holding on. That was us, scrambling through the half-collapsed vent hallway north of the old habitation wing, dragging wounded, reeling from the control room fight, trying to link back up with anyone who hadn't already fled or gone dark. Brandt was still bleeding from the shoulder, and 2 others, Devon and Shal, had taken blunt force injuries during the breach. Seema and I moved ahead to clear the path. The corridor we chose ran along a maintenance track, a sealed auxiliary loop originally designed for automated carts and resupply. I remembered that route. Used it dozens of times during my shift years. It was narrow, but it connected directly to the mid-tier fabrication lab, which would have dropped us behind our fallback line at Subsector C. That was the plan. The corridor was darker than expected. Not emergency red dark. Just starved. Power had been deliberately cut from the floor-level guides. The walls had that dry, staticky feel of heatless metal, the kind of chill that clings to electronics long after they've gone dead. We passed what looked like an old maintenance locker, twisted off its hinges, but no signs of tampering. No wires, no trip sensors. We counted steps, pacing exactly 87 meters from the junction, which should have landed us within 15 meters of the inner turn. I was third in line. Devon, moving with a limp but steady, went first. Then Seema. I followed, rifle up, eyes sweeping the ceiling for panel distortions. Standard ambush signs. Behind me came Shal and Brandt, with the rest spread out along the corridor in two-person spacing, as trained. Then Devon stepped on the trigger. It wasn't the floor. That's the detail I'll never forget. It was the ceiling. A small, thin filament, like a fishing line, ran just beneath the highest support beam. Meredith had woven it through the ventilation grill and tensioned it against a secondary bolt attached to a pressure switch mounted behind the wall panel. The trip line didn't break. It bowed. That was the key. Once it curved inward past a certain threshold, the system treated it as a breach and sent a signal. The corridor didn't explode so much as fold. First came the sound, low like a distant groan of steel giving way. Then, a white flash from behind the second bulkhead, followed by a shockwave that threw me forward. I remember hitting the floor on my side, bouncing once, feeling my arms scream from the impact. Then the floor buckled. Not all of it, just a 4-foot span along the center channel. It cracked inward, like a mouth opening. Brandt disappeared first. He dropped into it mid-step. I heard him cry out, but not a scream, more like a gasp. Shal was next. He barely managed to throw himself sideways. His left foot clipped the edge of the gap, twisted, broke. I could hear it snap. Then the fire came up from below. A pulse of heat, sharp and rolling, like someone had pulled the oven door open in hell. The corridor shook again. Something cracked behind me. Then came the second blast, a pressure release detonation. Not meant to kill, but to collapse. And it worked. The left wall came down like a guillotine, chunks of paneling, conduit, exposed rebar. One piece caught my leg, right thigh, just above the knee. At first, I thought it was a glancing hit. I tried to move, to shift, but nothing responded. I looked down and saw what had really happened. The rebar hadn't struck me, it had gone through me. Straight through, like a steel rod driven by the weight of a building. No exit wound, just pressure, tight, wrong. My brain refused to process the damage in the first few seconds. I reached for the bar, touched the surface. Hot. I pulled back, hand blackened with dust and blood. That's when the smoke rolled in. Seema was calling my name. I could hear her over the comms. I couldn't reply. My transmitter was half melted, the earpiece buzzing. She got to me anyway. Don't ask me how. I just remember her silhouette emerging through the haze. One arm already soaked in someone else's blood, face streaked with carbon. She dropped beside me, checked the wound, looked at me like she wanted to say something. But she didn't. Just opened the trauma kit and went to work. Brandt was alive. He'd managed to pull himself into a side channel, a utility vent, before the collapse. Shal was unconscious but breathing. Devon was gone, swallowed by the blast. Then the alarms changed. Not the gas warning, not fire, motion alarms, multiple points, East Corridor breach, Upper Hall Junction, Subsector B crawl space. They were coming. The infected, drawn by the sound, or the heat, or the sudden vacuum of dead air. Didn't matter. They were coming. I tried to get up again. Seema pushed me down. "You're not walking on that," she said. Flat, not cruel, just fact. I asked her how many minutes we had. She didn't answer. The others began forming a perimeter. No point in dragging me yet. The rebar had to come out first, and that wasn't happening without a lift system or a cutting torch, neither of which we had. So I made the call. "Leave me here," I said. Seema froze. The others stared. "Seal the passage. Get to the fallback chamber. Use the eastern shaft." They refused. All of them. Even Brant, who could barely lift his arm. Instead, they rigged a mobile barricade, spare plates, thermal blankets, 2 dismounted door shields, and formed a wedge around the wreckage. While Seema stabilized the leg with a pressure wrap and morphine mix, Brant rewired the motion sensors to trigger a remote arc burst if anything moved through the western junction. We could hear them by then. Feet. Dozens of them. Not the shuffling kind. Not the slow, groaning beasts of early infection. These were faster. They paced. They tested sound. One even tapped its claws. Yes, claws, against the steel floor like it was counting. Seema hissed a warning. We held our breath. Then, the first wave hit. 4 of them, all pale, mottled, eyes blistered from surface burn exposure. 2 wore tattered remnants of what might have been security gear. The others were in civilian fabric, no tags. We dropped them, fast, controlled bursts. But it didn't stop. 6 more came, then 8, then too many to count. We fought from behind the barricade for as long as we could. Seema's rifle jammed twice. Brant collapsed once from blood loss and had to be pulled back by a belt strap. Charles, still unable to stand, threw a flare into the crowd and temporarily blinded them. But they kept coming, crawling, climbing, pouring like fluid over the fallen. And still I couldn't move. I felt the steel in my leg shifting every time someone bumped me. I bit down on my own tongue to stay quiet. Blood filled my mouth. I couldn't spit, didn't want to draw noise. Then a miracle. One of the infected tripped a wire. The arc burst triggered. The corridor lit up with fire and noise. Searing plasma discharge, strong enough to torch the front line. That was our chance. Brant and Seema hauled me back. Charles crawled. 2 others covered. We fell into the service tunnel and sealed the hatch. The silence afterward was unreal. Nothing. Just the ring of ears half blown by the blast and the throb of wounds too deep to bind fully. I blacked out not long after. They said I was gone for 9 hours. They said the leg had to come off. When I woke up, we were in the fallback chamber, an old server bay converted into a triage ward. My leg was gone from the knee down, wrapped in salvaged linen stitched with fire-heated clamps, numbed by whatever was left in the pain injector supply. I remember blinking up at the ceiling tiles, counting the cracks in the concrete, listening to the sound of someone, probably Brant, dragging a cot into place beside me. Everything ached, but it was a dull ache, distant and submerged like noise through water. Someone had wrapped the stump clean. There was still pressure, but not pain. Not yet. Just the throb of survival. Just the cold clarity of being awake when I shouldn't be. Outside, the silence pressed in like a second ceiling. No shouting, no gunfire, no metal on metal. Just quiet. And beneath that quiet, buried so deep I thought I imagined it, the echo of everything we'd left behind. Screams sealed behind blast doors. Fires eating up the hallways. Names I hadn't dared speak since. The bunker was still standing, technically, but what we left inside it wasn't worth reclaiming. Just ghosts. Ghosts and rot. I must have faded in and out for hours, maybe days. When I finally had the strength to sit up, the world felt thinner, as if the air had lost something. A presence, a pressure, a kind of tension that had kept us alive and on edge for so long. It took me a while to understand why, because the flood had already passed. The infection never came all at once. That was the first rule we learned in the early years, back before the maps were obsolete and satellite feeds still sputtered now and then through relay towers. The infected weren't like a flood in the old stories. Not one great wave crashing all at once. They were trickles. They were the sound of rustling brush in the distance. A silhouette just too slow to be human. A cough at the edge of camp you were sure you imagined. And then another. And another. Until you were surrounded. But this time, it was different. This time, the flood came for real. We were still in the fallback chamber when the first warning came. Caleb had run a fiber optic line from the motion grid on the north approach. Just a loop system tied to the old engineering diagnostics. Crude but workable. The panel lit up with a single red pulse, then 2, then 27. It blinked so fast the system couldn't keep up. We thought it was a power loop at first. An error. Maybe the antenna had shorted again. Then we heard the ground. Not footsteps, the ground. It hummed, it vibrated. Dust rattled from the ceiling tiles. That's when Brant turned to me, and for the first time since the assault began, I saw his face drop into something beyond fatigue, beyond pain. He looked like someone seeing a funeral they knew was scheduled for tomorrow, but had started today. May helped me sit upright. The pain was muted now, filtered through whatever cocktail Clara had injected into the infusion drip rigged above my cot. The stump was wrapped and braced, half of it still crusted with dried blood. I told her to get me up. She didn't argue. We both knew I wouldn't be walking, but I had to see it. They carried me through the backup corridor, the one behind the server wall. It had survived the blast, though the western end was charred and the floor tiles buckled from pressure. Through a broken panel near the old oxygen intake vault, I got my first look. They were coming from the tree line, hundreds, maybe more. Some shambled, but most ran. They didn't move like the early ones. No staggering, no twitching. These were focused, streamlined. Some of them crawled on all fours, weaving between the others, feral and fast. Others wore the remnants of scavenged armor, duct tape, mismatched plates, straps of bone and metal. I don't know if they remembered what gear was for. Maybe they'd seen enough of us to mimic it. Maybe instinct pushed them to evolve. They didn't scream. That was what made it worse. It was silent. A wave of bodies closing in on a compound already cracked open by our own hands. Clara was shouting now, barking orders into the tunnel. She and Brant had already started pushing survivors toward the lower exits, emergency hatches we hadn't used in years. They led into the drainage canals behind the hill, still partially clear after the old filtration plant burned out. It wasn't safe, but it was the only way. I told them we couldn't outrun that kind of mass. Not with wounded, not in fractured terrain. That's when May suggested it. We leave the gates open. It was madness on the face of it. But the logic held. We were fractured, spread. A full retreat meant being torn apart across 3 corridors and 2 underground pipe systems. But if we left the main gates open, the infected would be drawn into the bunker, into the trap we had spent weeks trying to avoid. Meredith's fortress was still wired, still deadly. Turrets, pressure floors, collapsing doors, automated ignition arrays. If we could time it right, they'd flood the halls we no longer held. The place would eat itself, and we'd be ghosts. So we split. Brant and Clara led one group through the east channel, half collapsed, but still passable. May took 4 more, including the injured, through the sanitation shaft. I went last. They strapped me to a drag sled, a reinforced litter with insulated sides, and hauled me toward the loading lift. On the way down, we passed the command hall. That's when I saw her, Meredith, standing just beyond the shattered blast door, half in shadow. Her coat was torn at the shoulder, soaked through with blood that had dried to a dark crust. One leg dragged slightly as she stepped forward, her balance off. Her arm was braced against the wall, like it was the only thing holding her upright. She was clearly hurt, badly. One side of her face was burned, the edge of her hairline singed. But her eyes were the same, cold, focused, calculating, even now. I asked if she wanted to live. No games, no threats, just the question. She didn't answer right away, just stood there, shoulders shaking with the effort of holding herself up. Then, in a voice so hoarse I could barely hear it, she said, "I already did. I told her we could get her out. No tricks, no revenge, that it didn't have to end here." She shook her head, slow and firm, like the motion hurt. "I made this place," she said. "Let it be what it is." Then she turned, not quickly, not easily, but with every ounce of will she had left, and walked into the west corridor, toward the noise, toward the flames, toward the swarm, and I never saw her again. We reached the lower levels just as the main breach went. We heard it, even underground, an impact like a freight train hitting concrete. Then came the alarms, all of them, The system didn't know what to prioritize. Fire, structural collapse, motion breach, overload warning. They all screamed at once, until someone, probably Caleb, pulled the breaker from the auxiliary control line. That left us with silence again. Until the flood hit, they swarmed into the halls just as we planned. Dozens, then hundreds. They tore down barriers, tripped traps, collapsed tunnels. The bunker devoured them by reflex. Walls slammed shut behind them. Floors opened. Flames erupted from hidden vents. The very systems Meredith had rigged to keep us out now turned on them. We heard the pressure alarms as the doors fell, one after another, cutting off rooms, locking them in, sealing the nightmare inside steel tombs meant for people. But not all of them were trapped. Some spilled past the choke points, into the power line, into the side corridors, into the walls. We ran anyway. No formation, no plan, just movement. Clara's group reached the tree line first, Brant's not far behind. The drag sled scraped across stone and earth as they hauled me through the broken fence, across the drainage slope, down toward the waterway. The night lit behind us like a thunderhead. One of the turrets went nuclear. The whole sector behind us lit up in white. For 1 second, the forest glowed. Then the fire collapsed inward. And then, they were gone. Not all, but most. Trapped, burned, buried. We kept moving. Didn't stop until dawn. We lost May somewhere after the second ravine. She collapsed behind a rock and told us not to wait. We did. For an hour, then another. Then the sun came, and the infected didn't follow. We waited. She never came back. We made it to the river crossing by noon. Spent the next 3 days building temporary shelter from the ruins of a way station, a pre-outbreak commuter hub with a shattered roof and exposed wiring. We slept in shifts, ate what was left in our packs, and stitched each other together in silence. Only then did someone speak again. Brant asked if we'd won. I didn't answer. Not right away. Later that night, under the stars, with the sky bleeding orange from distant fires, I said the only thing that made sense. We didn't win, we just didn't die. The years we don't talk about aren't silent because nothing happened. They're silent because too much did. You don't talk about the months where you ate the same crushed food bar every other day while the ceiling dripped something that might have once been drinkable. You don't talk about waking up and checking the motion sensors every half hour, even though no one else had the strength to sleep either. You don't talk about the things you chose not to bury because the ground was too frozen or the air too choked with ash. But I'm talking now, because someone has to remember what happened after the flood, after the fire. The bunker wasn't entirely lost. Not right away. Not all at once. It held, barely, and in all the wrong ways. Most of the east wing, where Meredith had run her command room, and the old vault annex, collapsed sometime that first week. I don't know if it was structural failure or a second internal blast. Maybe both. We heard the shift at night, like a throat clearing from underground. The ground trembled. Dust leaked from every vent. Then, silence. When we went to look, there was nothing left past Corridor 5. Just a jagged wall of broken rebar, compacted metal, and a void full of echo. The access door was sealed so tight we couldn't even cut through. Eileen tried once. The torch flared for 10 minutes, and the steel didn't budge. We marked it off and left a sign. No one passed here. Not for superstition, just respect. What remained was Sector 3A, the backup habitat zone. Originally built for a science team and their families, it was smaller, cramped. A single hallway spine running through 8 rooms on either side, each designed for 4 occupants. We made it work for 23, pulled down every bunk we could salvage, welded braces to the old dormitory tables, and turned them into tiered beds. Insulated the air vents with scavenged insulation and taped up filtration cloth. May's old notes helped us patch the environmental system together. She'd copied schematics from the southern filtration array back when we first arrived in the bunker. Without those scribbles in her field log, we'd have choked on dry mold by the first month. The light is always dim now. Half the overheads burned out, and we never found enough fuses to reroute the grid fully. We run on manual cycles. 6 hours of light, 10 hours of dark. The rest of the time, we run on what the solar array provides. when it works. Brandt's crew repaired the upper plates using panels from the old observatory dome. That lasted a winter. Now we're back to rigged copper spools and repurposed glass rods from the greenhouses. The eastern doors, what's left of them, are rusted open at a 40-degree angle, like a jaw that dislocated mid-scream and never closed. We stacked crates across the breach, filled them with scrap metal and concrete powder, and sealed the whole thing with lead paint and fabric netting. It doesn't stop the cold, but it slows it down, keeps the wind from howling too loud at night. My prosthetic isn't a miracle of engineering. It's scrap-welded and tied to my thigh with a harness built from an old shoulder rig. The socket's loose, too many shifts in the weld line, and I have to brace it with a foam wedge and copper tubing. I bend myself once a week. The pain isn't sharp anymore. It's just constant, dull, like pressure before a storm. I don't walk so much as lean forward and hope the rig cooperates. Clara did what she could with the tools we had, but without real surgical fitting, every step is a guess. Brandt carries me when the ground's uneven. Sometimes Eileen does it when his back gives out. We take turns being broken now. Food comes slow, mostly dry legumes, rehydrated starch packs, the occasional tin from a pre-outbreak military crate. Sometimes we find old mushroom grow packs in the hydro chambers and scrape them into soups. Once every 6 weeks, we pull up one of the old trout buckets from the water intake below the base, if the nets haven't rotted through. The fish are small now, pale, but they're alive, and they remind us that something still grows. The old broadcast room, my room, is now half storage locker, half operations post. The original console was damaged in the flood, so we rebuilt one from the backup terminals. It's smaller. The mic isn't directional anymore, and the gain control is temperamental. But it works. I bolted the unit to a steel tray, wired a battery pack from a solar cart, and used piano wire to hold the antenna rig upright outside the blown vent shaft. It's angled now, not ideal, but in the early hours, just before sunrise, the bounce carries far. I get static from as far as Bismarck sometimes. Once, I think I heard something in Spanish. No voice, just patterns. Like a coded burst. Never found it again. I don't broadcast every day anymore. The tape stock's limited, and the transmitter coils run hot if I push them too long. But I keep recording. Sometimes just reports, sometimes memory. We lost 3 more this winter. Nora slipped on the south stairwell, never regained consciousness. Tom didn't wake up one morning. And Elijah, we think it was the cough. He kept it quiet, didn't want to waste antibiotics. By the time we checked, it was too late. We buried them behind the old maintenance chamber, in the walls, wrapped in plastic and layered with dry cement and lime powder. We say their names each week, so we don't forget. We learned not to ask why anymore. Out in the wider world, what little word we get is bleak. Tower 9 burned. That came from a trade runner 2 months back. Said the whole compound went up during a raid. Some said it was bandits. Others say it was an internal fire. Either way, it's silent now. Kansas Plain Line Station still broadcasts sometimes. A woman's voice, too faint to understand. But it's there. The infected don't come as often. We think the cold slows them, or maybe they just followed other trails. Still, every few weeks, we get 1 or 2 near the south hatch. Brandt keeps the tripwire loaded. Eileen cleaned out a set of 22 long rifles from the vault. Nothing heavy, but good for single targets. We haven't used anything louder in months. It draws attention. We sleep near the radio room now, most of us. It's warmest here, with the power cores nearest the surface vents. I strung some old blackout curtains across the ceiling to reduce light bleed. The kids, what few remain, draw chalk lines on the walls. One of them traced the outline of the old world map in charcoal, marked places she wants to go. Half of them don't exist anymore, but she draws them anyway. We let her. That's life here now, ash and iron, cold and memory. We hold on because we don't know what else to do. Not because we think we'll win, but because we already paid too much to stop trying. There are 38 of us now. I've run the numbers 3 times this week, just to be sure. 38 names scratched into a ledger that started with 124. Some lines are crossed out. Others have little stars next to them. Notations I made back when we thought tracking food rotations mattered more than marking the dead. Now, the stars are for those we buried, and the blank spaces are for the ones who vanished without a trace. If you're reading this years from now, if anyone ever reads this, I want it to be known that attrition is a softer word for disintegration. We didn't lose people. They were peeled away, stolen. With every cycle, the circle gets smaller. It's not always dramatic. Some go quietly. Respiratory infections from sleeping too close to the vents. A fall down the maintenance shaft. Dehydration because they rationed for someone else and didn't tell us. We found Mira slumped in the greenhouse corridor last spring. Knees drawn up, hands folded. No sign of trauma. She'd simply stopped. I don't know how else to say it. It's like the will to keep going evaporated one morning, and the body just caught up. The attacks come irregularly now. Never full force. Never the kind of coordinated push we saw back in the early years, when raiders would roll with ex-military rigs and scavenge drones. Now it's just skirmishes. 3 or 4 desperate men testing the line. Sometimes it's even fewer. Just one wild-eyed figure approaching from the tree line, holding up hands, asking for medicine or food. You learn not to answer right away. More often than not, someone's waiting behind them, trying to count how many guns we raise in return. A few nights ago, we caught one trying to pry open the external hatch to the water filters. Eileen's motion sensor snapped him on infrared. She wanted to open fire, but I told her to wait. He left on his own when he realized we weren't asleep. Still, we reset the tripwire and packed the floodlights with new phosphor tubes. I keep a tally of every confirmed approach. Each red mark on the outer chalkboard represents a moment we were seen. Doesn't matter whether they engaged. Doesn't matter whether they spoke. If they saw us, they marked us. We're not invisible anymore. Not in this state. I remember when we used to send 2-person teams out every week to forage. Brant and I used to go up together. One would carry the sled, while the other checked the soil tracks for movement. We didn't speak above a whisper until we were at least a mile from the bunker. On one of those runs, I went alone. It was routine. We'd cleared the zone the week before, and I needed replacement fuses from the old medical storage site 5 clicks west. Took me most of the morning to get there and back, longer than I'd anticipated. When I returned, Kira was gone. Not dead. Gone. Her cot was still warm. Her boots were gone, but her belt and pack were still in the maintenance room. No signs of struggle. No blood. Just a folded paper slip tucked into her bed frame. No writing. Just a pressed leaf. I still keep it in the back of my notebook. Dry. Cracked. Still green in the center, oddly enough. May thinks she saw someone out in the trees that night. Too tall to be infected. Too still to be casual. Nobody pursued. Nobody could. We were running low on ammo, and the sensors had gone down for maintenance rotation. We never spoke about it after. Just added her name to the list. Another blank space. No star. There's a numbness that sets in after a certain number of disappearances. The ache turns to routine. You stop asking if they're alive. You just assume they're somewhere colder than you, or that they were taken for trade. That's the other thing no one wants to talk about. Not openly, but we know. Some people out there, they still barter in people. I've intercepted fragments of conversations on the UHF band, shortwave codes, talking about units and deliveries, and verified non-infected stock. I log them, I record them, and then I let the signal drift back to static. I still speak into the microphone most nights, even when I know nobody's on the other end. It's not about being heard anymore. It's about preserving the act, reaffirming the signal. The antenna array's misaligned half the time, and the wiring crackles every time we rotate power to the old air compressors. But it still transmits. A broken voice is better than a silent one. Sometimes I think I hear someone keying back. A single pulse, a modulation spike. Maybe a child's voice on the line. Once, I thought I heard Meredith again, but that's just the bleed. The system backloading echoes from earlier recordings. You learn to stop chasing ghosts. Every week, I read the names. Not just the ones we've lost, though I do that too, but the ones still here. I speak them aloud so they don't become abstract, so they don't fade into the list. There's power in naming things, even when you have no power left. The kids have started drawing murals again. One of the south corridor walls now features a kind of wildland painting, fields and cabins, deer, streams, none of which any of them have ever seen in person. It's all from old storybooks we salvaged from the school wing. Eileen brought one in last winter. Some of the pages were burned, but the cover was intact. This land is ours, a children's atlas, full of smiling farm families and golden retrievers. They hang on to it like it's scripture. I don't stop them. The more lies we lose, the more meaning we assign to the stories that remain. May started a new project near the radio bay, a memorial wall. It's just rebar and scavenged siding for now, bolted to the northern service tunnel. But every name has a copper tag. Each one's been carved by hand. That's how we mark time now. Not in calendars or rotations. In copper tags and empty cots. In the people left behind, and the people who leave. We ration less aggressively these days. If we're going to fade, we might as well do it with full bellies. Eileen made cornbread last week. Real cornbread. Ground acorn flour, binder mix, and half a tin of condensed milk. I hadn't tasted anything close to that since the second year. The smell filled the whole sector. Everyone came to the mess hall, even those too sick to walk. We ate together, shared stories, laughed once. Not forced laughter, the kind that comes out when you forget the math for a second. We don't forget often, but we try to forget sometimes. 38, that's the count. But not the end. Not yet. The sealed hatch had remained untouched since the assault. Her quarters, Meredith's, were behind 3 layers of security access, one of which had been destroyed when the east wing collapsed. For 2 years we walked past it, avoided it. A few of the newer residents didn't even realize what lay behind those scarred walls. But I did. And eventually, that weight, the unanswered questions, the unresolved war between us, became too much to leave buried. Eileen helped me bypass the locking mechanism. The hinges were warped from stress, and the frame had shifted after one of the power conduits in the adjacent sector ruptured. We had to wedge a hydraulic spreader into the seam and wait 4 hours for the heat to loosen the frame enough to budge. When it finally opened, the stale air that spilled out was thick with copper and dust. Not rot, not mildew, just old air, untouched. Her quarters weren't lavish. For all her control, Meredith never lived like the elite. No silk bedding or private climate control. Just a steel-framed cot, a terminal setup rigged with 3 redundant backups, and walls lined with hard-copy logbooks. Shelves of schematics and operational manuals stood untouched. A single mug still rested on her desk, enameled white with a faded red crescent, something she must have taken from the infirmary years ago. I didn't touch anything at first, just stood there, letting the silence settle in. The room felt like a mausoleum, not because she died there. She didn't. But because every piece of it was arranged with such mechanical intent that it no longer felt like it had ever been lived in. Her logs were still intact. The backups had power, courtesy of the same geothermal system she commissioned 2 years before our split. That irony wasn't lost on me. The power that kept us breathing, the filters that kept the ration water drinkable, the isolated greenhouse sector that still yielded enough tubers and fungus to keep the kids fed. Every one of them ran on Meredith's infrastructure, systems she designed not for comfort, but for survival in total lockdown. The logs spanned years, indexed by week, with cross-referenced maintenance schedules and event tallies. I found an entry dated 2 months before we arrived with the High Pine survivors. She detailed external movements, probable pathing of nearby raider factions, and predictions about supply flow collapses within a 50-mile radius. Her handwriting was precise, angular. Notes were made in black pen, annotations in red. Every death inside the bunker was recorded. Every departure marked with a theory. Some left for supplies, some defected. Some were presumed dead within hours of vanishing. She wrote about me too, at first just in the abstract. RC has gone quiet. Assumes bunker is still compromised. Then more pointed. If RC returns, protocol will be observed. Later entries shift. Her words grew colder, more resolute. RC is a liability. If he brings outsiders, he jeopardizes containment. Her definition of containment was always broader than mine. She saw infection not just in biology but in desperation, chaos, unfiltered panic. To her, we were vectors of collapse just by existing outside her system. I found a binder near her cot, leather-wrapped, worn. Inside were her personal thoughts, or at least, the closest Meredith ever came to vulnerability. She didn't apologize, didn't admit failure, but she questioned. That much was clear. Is control worth survival if survival becomes control? Do I protect the bunker or imprison it? If they see me as tyrant but live, have I done harm? In her final entry, dated the night before our siege, she wrote, "Rowan will come. He won't come for revenge. He'll come for hope. And I'll have to take it from him, because hope is not protocol." That stuck with me, sat in my gut like bad rations. Because she was right. I didn't come for vengeance. I came to rebuild, and she met me with the only tools she knew: containment, calculation, force. The room had a panel near the rear utility wall, barely visible behind her old field coat. I pried it open and found a sealed cache, hardened data drives, a folding radio antenna, spare compressed oxygen canisters, and 3 vacuum-sealed ration packs. Even at the end, she'd prepared for fallback. Not escape, just fallback. May joined me later that day. I didn't stop her. She helped catalog the binders, took inventory, and photographed every page of Meredith's final logs. We agreed not to share everything. Some truths don't help, but others might shape how we survive what's next. I waited until the end of the week to do what I should have done sooner. Near the main reactor column, there's a wall we use to mount tool racks, old polymer trays and pressure gloves for when the heat exchangers flare. I cleared the hooks and bolted a sheet of composite paneling to the wall. Then I stenciled one name, Meredith Chambers, 2029-2065. No eulogy, no sermon, just a name, just the years. Most of the residents don't ask. The ones who remember her stay quiet. Those who knew her only from the stories just nod, eyes down, and keep walking. No one vandalizes it. No one moves the panel. It's not forgiveness. It's not condemnation. It's memory. It's weight. We owe our survival to the very systems she installed to lock us out. And I've lived long enough to admit that sometimes what feels like cruelty is just a different language for fear. Maybe we were both wrong, in different ways. Me with my voice, her with her silence. But at least we were speaking the same language by the end. Sometime after the reactor wall was marked and the old command room finally repurposed for basic logistics, I returned to something I'd almost forgotten I'd carried with me all these years. A bundled set of NATO field communication manuals wrapped in plastic and sealed in waxed canvas. Found them in the comms bunker outside the old NORAD fallback line, back when I was heading south through the blast zones. Thought they might make good fire starter at first. Glad I didn't. In these pages were cold, sterile procedures born for war, but salvaged now for rebuilding. The cover was worn from handling, stained with grease from one of the old transmitter repairs. I'd annotated the margins by candlelight, using scavenged pencils that I sharpened with the same knife I used to skin wire insulation. Inside were everything from antenna angle math to covert signaling basics. But what mattered more than the technical pages were the doctrines buried deep: civilian population reinforcement, improvised perimeter layering, relay tower planning in contested zones. It wasn't just about talking across distance. It was about survival under collapse. Some of the younger ones, kids who were born during the blackout years, didn't understand what manuals were. They'd grown up with fragments of knowledge passed on like folklore, no systemic training, just repetition. So I started reading aloud during off-rotations. Not speeches, just pages slowly with explanations. Field Protocol Echo 9, Ghost Zone marking, flare tree calibration. It was Seema who did something with it. She's maybe 23 now, barely remembered the last open sky before the fires. Grew up in half-collapsed settlements up north. Her father an electrical engineer who bartered repairs for food and sometimes mercy. She'd been paying attention to the flare grid pages I marked up. She scavenged old gear from the turret wreckage and rewired a dead pressure sensor into a trip relay system using stripped rebar, copper scrap, and the detonator from an old flare gun shell. The thing wasn't elegant, but it worked. We tested it 3 nights in a row, baiting a few infected across the lower ridge. You know how rare that is? For something to work, for a warning to come before the breach. She placed them along the west perimeter, rigged into the chain-link spurs we'd wound into the barbed drags. 4 of them, 2 by the ravine, 1 at the tunnel mouth, 1 near the snow-buried road we call South Gate. Each flare fired up in orange bloom, silent burst for 2 seconds, then smolder. The infected didn't react much to the light, but it gave us an edge. More than once it bought us the 30 seconds we needed to reinforce a breach or reposition to intercept. I started broadcasting short recordings of the manual pages, my voice flat and slow, describing the setup process, listing common circuit components you could salvage from microwaves or old generators, offering tips for calibrating trip pressure using melted fishing weights, told listeners how to layer lines of broken glass and metal shavings between snowbanks to create passive sound alerts, how to repurpose wind turbine rotors into sirens if you balance them right with bent steel spoons, told them how to triangulate their camp's vulnerability using the pattern of past attacks. It wasn't theory anymore, it was field doctrine, written in blood and noise and hard math. Brandt joked once that I'd become a preacher for dead military ghosts. Maybe he's right. But those ghosts knew something we've all forgotten. Survival isn't an accident. It's process, pattern, protocol. And even if the world that wrote these books died screaming, their instructions remain. You just have to turn the pages and listen. We made new copies by hand. Eileen, Seema, even one of the kids, Owen, who's become scarily good at block lettering despite his age. We wrapped them in waxed paper, tied them with twine, and stored them in the emergency locker near the water tanks. If the bunker ever falls again, and it might, those manuals need to make it out. Not everything inside was practical though. Some sections described advanced troop logistics, drone coordination, command uplinks, all dead tech now, nothing orbits, no satellites left. But I still kept those pages, because they remind us what once was coordinated, what once functioned, and maybe what could again, one day. Sometimes I read these aloud when no one's in the room. Old habit. The tone calms me, reminds me of when things made sense. A voice speaking rules into chaos. Last night the snow started again. Late, thick flakes drifting like ash. I stood outside the hatchway to the comms room, leaned on the railing where we'd rigged the defensive coil, and watched the snow build on top of the rusted razor wire. The wind carried little sound, just the distant clatter of broken fencing shifting under its own weight. No flare, no breach, just stillness, cold, white, and untouched for miles. You might think a world like this would be silent, but it isn't. It murmurs in metal and code. It hums through half-dead wires and forgotten systems, machines long past their design lives, still spinning out signals like prayers into the dark. It's not silence we live in. It's a different kind of noise, one built from memory, rust, and repetition. Then, one day, a hiss started. Not static. Static has its own voice, a random pattern of decay and leftover signals, but a hiss shaped by intention, a slow, rising pressure over the band. At first, I thought it was cross-interference, a bleed from a solar flare, maybe even a failed relay loop stuck in feedback. The old transmitter had been glitchy ever since Sector 3B lost its grounding rod to frost heave. But the hiss wasn't random. It repeated every 27 seconds, with a pause between. 3 rising tones, then hiss, silence, repeat. I didn't call it out at first. No sense in spooking people with ghosts until you're sure they're not just echoes. I logged it, catalogued it by time, frequency, waveform distortion, just a leftover habit. The emergency binder I keep near the transmission rack has grown thick with pages, some stained with grease, others warped from condensation, but still meticulously indexed. Page 112 now includes this, receiving an unidentified echo pattern on 51.40 MHz, marked as yellow priority. That means investigate but do not respond, not unless we know what's listening back. The signal changed on the 4th day. The hiss was replaced by a looped fragment. Not a voice at first, just a series of tonal bursts, then what sounded like a mechanical code burst. But buried in the noise, Beneath the digital compression artifacts came words. English. Broken, clipped, like it had been compressed through 3 levels of analog to digital conversion and then played through a dying speaker. Outpost, red, alert, contamination breach, north, fallback to. It looped. Every 45 seconds, cut off at the same point. Some emergency signal, maybe triggered by automation after a total personnel loss. Could have been old, years old, repeating without any human left to shut it down. But then, something new hit the band. Clean, uncompressed, male voice, probably early 40s. No regional dialect I could identify. Calm, too calm. This is Victor Station, signal confirmed. Do not engage red eyes. Avoid sector line 9 at all costs. Perimeter compromised. Repeat, do not engage red eyes. Then silence. That transmission only came once. I recorded it. Replayed it 5 times before logging it under a new page. 117, red tab. Red tabs mean threat potential unknown but likely. That voice wasn't part of the original emergency loop. Someone new, alive, broadcasting. And they knew we were still listening. Red eyes. It's not a phrase I've heard before, not in this context, but it stuck with me. Long after the broadcast faded, I kept returning to the wording. Do not engage. That implies encounters, survivors on the move, maybe factions forming, maybe experiments, or mutations. I thought about our encounter 4 months ago, when Brandt's patrol spotted the unmoving bodies at the edge of the ravine, stiff figures lying flat in the ice. When they approached, one of them twitched. Not a reflex, not nerve decay, a timed, deliberate reaction. We'd written it off as a fluke, a hibernating infected cluster disturbed by footfall or vibration. But now I wonder if those weren't sleepers. Shortwave's funny like that. You think you're the only voice in the dark. You build your signal, tune your antenna, route your power through batteries that scream for maintenance, and you tell yourself, you're alone. You have to. It's easier to believe the world forgot how to speak than to accept that something might still be listening. But the truth is, someone always is, even if it's just machines built by dead hands, repeating warnings we never heard in time. Seema thinks it's just artifact bleed. Eileen suspects it's from the Fallon relay in Nevada, an old military installation repurposed early in the outbreak for autonomous broadcast routing. If that's true, then the message might have been bouncing in a closed circuit for decades, only now finally reaching us as atmospheric conditions shift and relays crack open. Or maybe it's not a bounce, maybe it's new. I updated the binder, logged every phrase, tone and waveform signature, drew a speculative map of the possible origin range based on signal strength decay and terrain interference. It triangulates near the old salt flats, near Tonopah. That used to be drone territory before the Air Force base went silent. Too far to check, too dangerous to chase. I've ordered no response. Not yet, not until we're sure. Because if someone's sending messages like that, it means one of 2 things. Either they're trying to help, or they're trying to bait. And out here, bait has teeth. I left the antenna up overnight, switched to passive sweep mode, logged any bursts on fallback frequencies. Nothing came through. No follow-up, no repeat. Just that one message. The next morning, I walked the perimeter to clear my head. The flare trip at Southgate had tripped sometime before dawn, but no breach. Just wind or snow shear against the pressure wire. I reset it. The sky was clear, grey-blue and hard like frozen slate. I watched the snow fall again, soft this time, over the rusted razor wire, and thought about voices. Voices we don't recognize. Voices that use words like red eyes. Voices that don't loop. Voices that warn instead of plead. I'm not going to respond. Not yet. It's strange how quiet a shovel sounds when it breaks through soft earth. Not the dead-weight thud of boots on reinforced steel. Not the crack of perimeter flares, or the muted bark of a rifle through winter fog. Just the gentle push of metal teeth through soil thawed by the first true spring we've had in years. We turned the earth with old tools, mostly salvaged spades and post-hole diggers with worn handles, and did it by hand, because the batteries on the auger still won't hold a charge. The ground here isn't rich, not like the farmland that used to stretch across eastern Colorado. But we've got composting bins, ash fertilizer, and the runoff from Sector 2's greywater tanks. Brant tested the pH himself, swore we'd pull something edible out of it if we could just get a full season without an early freeze or infestation. He was right. 3 rows of carrots came up last week. Bitter and knobby, but real. We've got kale from seed packets dated 2059, dried and forgotten inside a looted shipping crate until Clara brought them in. Some of the seeds didn't germinate, but enough survived. For the first time in over a decade, I watched people bend over rows of green, tending, not fleeing. No rifles slung over shoulders, no screams from the perimeter, just the sound of tools on dirt and a soft radio playing from a rebuilt weather station. We call the place Signal Landing now. Started as a joke. May said it one night when she saw all the spare satellite dishes we scavenged arranged in the snow, pointing upward like we were expecting someone to land a shuttle. The name stuck. Even made a flag, stitched from tarp strips and old signage, a rising waveform over a jagged mountain ridge. There are 38 of us now. A few of the kids are old enough to patrol. Brant's got them running drills and learning the old protocols from my binder. Seema says we'll reach 40 before next winter if the weather holds and our seed stock stays viable. People still pass through. Not many, and never in groups larger than 3 or 4, but they're out there. Scavengers, traders, sometimes runners from collapsed settlements. The last ones came from a place called Broad Rock, west of the canyon. Said it was a hydro-powered mill turned safe zone until the water levels dropped and the batteries failed. Half their population moved on. The other half didn't get the chance. They carried stories of strange formations in the north, clusters of still infected that seemed to mimic survivor patrol routes, as if learning patterns. We've heard that one before. Nobody knows what to make of it. Just another mutation, or maybe something more. I log it all the same. Clara returned 3 weeks ago. Not the same Clara from the broadcast tower, but Clara DeWitt, the one who helped me stabilize the tower back in the early days. I thought she'd died when the relays blew out. Turns out she'd made it to an old solar farm down near Trinidad and spent the last 4 years salvaging panels and inverters with a group of engineers from one of the university enclaves. She brought 3 fully functional panels, rewired with new couplers and dust filters. It tripled our daytime power storage. We can now run the ultraviolet grow lamps for 4 full hours at night. I didn't ask how she got the panels up here, just hugged her and gave her half my winter stores as trade. We're not a fortress yet, but we're brighter than we've been in years. We sat under the intake scaffolding that night, passing around a tin of fermented chokeberry wine, listening to the inverter hum. I showed her the new map, the one stitched together from recon flights, old topographic records, and every traveler who's passed through. She laughed at how accurate it was, said it reminded her of a time when we used to argue about the shape of the world like it mattered. She offered me 2 things, trade routes and plans for something bigger, a new signal tower. I dreamed of it before, even sketched some schematics in the binder during the long winter, just to have something to do with my hands. But what Clara brought was real, pre-outbreak plans from a high-gain microwave uplink built in the late 2000 Fortieth as part of the Western Communications Initiative. She'd found the diagrams buried in a vault drive left in a bunker under the University of Denver campus. With some modification, the design could be rebuilt using parts from our own relay and solar arrays. The idea isn't just to transmit emergency broadcasts anymore. It's to build a 2-way network, a way to receive and respond, to chart who's left, where they are, what they need. It's ambitious. It might even be impossible. But that's the kind of talk we stopped accepting back when we buried the last of the old world. We've already designated the ridge where it'll go, east of the Sector 3 exhaust fans, past the old missile bay that we collapsed after the bunker assault. It gets full sunlight for 10 hours, and elevation clean enough to bounce a signal 40 miles under the right conditions. We'll call it Station 0. The signal will ride the same frequency I've used for years, 7.400 megahertz. Only now, it'll be stronger. I'm too old to run the tower myself. My leg's worse than I let on, and the prosthetic, scrap-welded from gear housing and rebar, groans every time I take the outer stairs. But I can still solder, still code, still teach, and there's a younger crew now. Kids born after the fall who only know stories about what the world used to be. I hand them the manuals, show them how to trim copper from old wire jackets, how to clean an RF coupler with nothing but vinegar and grit. They're faster than we were, hungrier, maybe smarter. There's something strange about spring, something quiet, like the world remembers how to breathe again after years of holding its breath. I've seen frost cling to the edge of our antenna mount, only to melt into a soft drip that feeds the moss growing under the power relay. I've seen birds return, cautious, erratic, nesting in the wreckage of the old storage deck. Their wings shimmer like metal under overcast light. Brant says they're a good omen. I don't believe in omens anymore, but I like their songs. Signal landing isn't what we planned. It's not clean, not safe, not permanent, but it's alive. And in the space between static and silence, that's enough. By early autumn, we knew the bunker wouldn't be enough on its own, not just in terms of food or shelter. Those we'd managed to scrape together with grit, scavenging, and a bit of hard-won luck. What we lacked was orientation. We needed a way to understand where we were in the wider scheme of things. Who was still out there? What roads were still passable? Which settlements still answered broadcasts? And which ones had gone dark for good? Without that, we weren't a community. We were just survivors counting days on the inside of a sealed drum. It started as a repurposed janitorial corridor, just an access hallway tucked behind the collapsed southern stairwell, where carts of bleach and paper towels once lived. When we cracked it open, half the ceiling was buckled from moisture damage, and one of the far corners stank like mildew and copper wire. Still, it was dry, secure, and large enough to build something we hadn't dared dream of in years. A command hub. Not for weapons or defenses, those we already had. This one would be for maps, for communication, for the world beyond our own gate. Brant suggested it, but it was Mila who made it real. She's young, 21, maybe 22. One of the kids rescued from the floodplain caravans back in '66. She'd spent most of her early years drawing murals in Sector 3's stairwells. Wolves, ridges, the stars as she imagined them. When she saw the blank concrete wall inside the new room, she didn't hesitate. She asked for chalk first, then charcoal, then real paint. I scrounged what I could from the old utility lockers, half-dried buckets, hardened brushes, things no one had touched since the estate became a graveyard. She set to work immediately. The map grew slowly. First came the landmarks we knew, the collapsed townships to the north, the broken bridges of the eastern routes, the scorched belt near the canyon where we detonated fuel drums to slow the horde during the retreat. Then came what others brought, new names scrawled from memory, directions traced in dirt during trade meets, rumors passed along like prayer. Burnscar, the Red Lattice, Broad Rock, Bunker 28. Half the names didn't match any old world coordinates. That didn't matter. The map wasn't about precision. It was about remembering who was left. We marked the locations of other broadcasts too. Not all were confirmed, but we logged them just the same. Some were shortwave repeaters still bouncing emergency tones from the early collapse. Others, like the ghost signal from Nevada, carried warped loopbacks of voices long dead. One in particular repeated the same 4 words every midnight. I still hear them. No origin point, just a carrier wave on 6.240 megahertz. Mila painted a thin crimson circle around its estimated triangulation zone, labeled it in shaky hand as Red Echo. Every night more was added, arrows for safe routes, X's for burned zones, curved lines for seasonal migration paths of both infected and scavenger groups, a hand-drawn compass in the top corner with a rising sun motif. It was crude, imperfect and beautiful, and when people walked into that room, they didn't see decay. They saw direction. They saw hope shaped in ink and dust. The hub became a place of ritual. At dusk, survivors would gather to update the wall, check our signal logs, or just stand in front of the map and name places they'd once seen. Sometimes they left tokens, old license plates, patches, scraps of signage from towns now gone, a faded highway marker for Route 85, a fire helmet from Pueblo, even a cracked phone case with a hand-drawn smiley face placed next to the marker for Red Rock. No one said why. No one asked. We let the wall speak for itself. That was also when I began training Mila on the radios. She'd shown curiosity before, but until then hadn't asked for formal instruction. Now, she showed up at my bench every morning with her own notepad, already scrawled with diagrams and guesses. I walked her through the systems one piece at a time, starting with frequency prioritization, fallback repeaters, and the protocol trees from the old NATO binders. She took to it quickly, faster than I expected. Her hands were steady with a soldering wand, and she learned to tune signal gain by ear. After a week, she was already logging traffic during night watch. We practiced encrypting outbound transmissions using simple tone patterns and dead air intervals. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep raiders from spoofing us again. I made her memorize the burn code phrases for asset denial, taught her the silent rhythm of emergency pings. She asked about the repeater towers east of the ridge, if we'd ever get them back online. I told her maybe, if the turbines hold. Truth was, I didn't expect to see them operational in my lifetime. But Mila could, and that mattered. As the weeks passed, people stopped referring to our shelter as the bunker. That word had weight to it, memories of isolation, fear, entrapment. Now they called it signal landing without hesitation. It wasn't a joke anymore. It was our name. And with it came a sense of identity we'd lost somewhere in the decades of ash and silence. We even built signage for the entrance, scavenged metal letters welded above the outer door. Seema nearly fell off the scaffold trying to bolt them into place. But when the job was done, and the letters gleamed under the reclaimed flood lamps, no one spoke for nearly a minute. Not out of reverence, but disbelief. We had named ourselves. That meant we might actually be something worth naming. One night, while Mila practiced call-out drills from the auxiliary desk, I sat at the back of the hub and stared at the map wall. I tried to trace all the places we'd been, all the people we'd lost. I saw Meredith's handwriting faintly etched on the original bunker blueprints, now layered behind Mila's red grid lines. I remembered the first broadcast I made after 5 years of silence, alone in the snow with nothing but a repurposed antenna and a dying voice. And now we had a wall. We still had enemies. Marauders roamed the high passes in rusted trucks, sometimes slinging flare grenades toward our ridge to test for weaknesses. Infected still drifted through the trees at night, especially near the old floodplain. But we had eyes on them now. Routes marked, patterns logged. We didn't stumble anymore. We anticipated. We adapted. That's the secret no one talks about. Survival isn't about strength. It's about remembering better. And right now, every line on that map is a memory turned into armor. The pattern first emerged in early spring. One of the scouts, a quiet man named Bristow, returned from a routine circuit past the southern runoff flats with a story he couldn't quite articulate. Said he'd walked past an old wreck, a delivery van split against a boulder, and saw 3 infected just standing near it. Not roaming, not stalking, just still, like mannequins in open air. He thought they were frozen or maybe caught mid-siege from weeks ago. He even threw a stone to be sure. Nothing, not even a twitch. Then, as he circled back an hour later, the wreck was untouched, but the infected were gone. No drag marks, no signs of decay. Just gone. I chalked it up to nerves at first. We all did, but the stories grew. Mila received a hand-scrawled transmission 2 nights later from a relay point west of Trinidad. The voice on the other end described an entire ridge of bodies seen at dusk, lying prone, breathing shallow, but unmoving until dark. The moment the sun dipped below the line of the broken tree canopy, they shifted, as one, like a tide exhaling. The survivor reporting it cut the call shortly after, but the logs remained. I went back through the archival files from the old world, hunting anything that matched this behavioral profile. None of the early CDC advisories, none of the medical logs from the refugee camps in 29 or 30 had anything close. This wasn't a symptom, it was a tactic. I compiled every known sighting and charted their locations on the map wall. At first they seemed random, isolated incidents too far apart to suggest coordination. But the more we plotted, the clearer it became. These things, whatever they were, followed the periphery of known safe paths. They never entered. They circled, observed, waited. Clara was the first to say it out loud during a morning logistics meet. "They're mapping us," she said, "the same way we mapped them." No one answered. We didn't need to. We'd been wondering the same thing. I created a new broadcast file, an open channel data log called Red Eye Protocol. We didn't use that term lightly. It came from a grainy photo taken 3 weeks prior by Seema's team along the northern ravine near the windshear fence. A single infected crouched low to the soil, bare skin slicked with dew. No movement for over 10 hours. But when the flash of the solar camera triggered, its eyes reflected red, not from light, from something else. The iris structure was wrong in a way none of our field notes could account for. The Red Eye file included times, locations, temperature variances, and estimated behavioral traits. I included a standard advisory. Do not engage. Do not make noise. Do not assume immobility means death. Above all, do not linger near objects or structures recently vacated by Red Eye types. Some of the corpses left behind carried strange readings, faint electromagnetic discharges, and sulfuric decay. Clara hypothesized some sort of delayed neural reactivation. I wasn't so sure. We also noticed another disturbing trend. Animals had stopped coming near those zones. Even crows, usually fearless scavengers, avoided fields where red eyes were last seen. It was as if the land itself had soured. The soil took longer to dry. Static clung to fabric longer. Radios clicked more often. Small signs, but undeniable once you noticed the rhythm. So we adapted, as we always do. Clara proposed a rotating watchtower relay system, independent nodes established between settlements. Each would monitor specific zones and report red eye sightings. It wouldn't be a network in the old world sense. No satellites, no uplinks, just human voices bouncing through the dark, one range at a time. I agreed, and within 2 weeks, Mila had trained 6 additional operators on hand pulse code relays and fallback burst transmission patterns. The first towers were crude, repurposed gas station awnings, rooftops of gutted municipal buildings, a few solar array scaffolds still intact enough to mount antennae. Each outpost was issued a log sheet, a flare rack, and a field radio tuned to signal landing's primary band. We called it Layer 9, after the failed UN protocol from the early days that had designated Level 9 infection zones as uncontainable. A bitter joke, maybe, but fitting. Then the reply came. It was faint, barely readable above the noise floor. Originated somewhere north of Cheyenne. A voice, young-sounding, uncertain. Claimed to be part of a farming collective that hadn't had contact with outsiders in over a decade. They'd seen the same patterns, stillness in the fields, shapes that only moved when unobserved. One of their own had vanished after touching a corpse too long. The voice ended the message with 5 words. "We are not the apex." That hit me harder than I expected. For all our rebuilding, for all our grit and scars and clever tools, we'd forgotten that we were still being watched. The infected had changed. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were being studied, tracked, maybe even herded. I logged the message into the Red Eye archive and encrypted it under priority status. Clara suggested expanding the network southward, toward the arid basins and dry riverbeds, where infected migration was slower. I agreed, but with caution. We needed eyes everywhere, but we couldn't afford to stretch ourselves thin. Mila spent the next 2 nights rewiring the emergency broadcast transmitter to automatically loop the updated Red Eye protocol every 4 hours. I watched her work by lamplight, soldering iron clenched between her teeth, fingers smeared with graphite and oil. She didn't look afraid, just focused. That scared me more than panic ever could. There's a calm that comes before the fall, a hush in the systems, a shared silence that every survivor learns to dread. And right now, the air feels too quiet. We'd had dry spells before, but this one had stretched too long. Cracked soil, low reservoir output, static shocks just from touching the wrong rail. Everyone felt it, even if no one said it aloud. Fire had always been the worst-case scenario for us. Infection you could shoot. Raiders you could outthink. But flame? Flame didn't care what rules you followed. The smoke hit us before the wind changed. I was monitoring the solar intake levels when Seema burst into the radio room, out of breath and covered in ash. She said the ridge above Sector 9 had caught fire, dry lightning or maybe a flare misfire. No one was sure. The tree line went up like stacked kindling, and within minutes, thick columns of black and orange had begun crawling down the slope. The western fields, our newest plots, freshly seeded and barely sprouting, were directly in its path. I couldn't walk the perimeter anymore. The prosthetic wasn't built for uneven terrain, and the steep incline out of the bunker's north exit was still littered with loose shale from the last freeze. But I could hear it. The fire. A low, constant growl, like air being torn in half. I could smell the resin, the scorched pine needles. It made the inside of my throat feel like rusted iron. From the command post, I coordinated relay efforts through the tower. Clara was already in the field, assembling containment lines with Seema, Brandt, and several others from the outer settlements. The problem wasn't just the blaze, it was the infected. We'd seen it before. Fire disorients them, sends them moving in strange patterns, but doesn't stop them. Sometimes it draws them. Something about heat. Some residual instinct maybe. Or maybe just the sound. That tearing wind. The outer plots had no formal wall, only staggered spike traps and wire trip alarms. The only defense was the fire break Clara's team was cutting in real time, armed with pickaxes and dirt shovels, dragging old metal sheet panels from ruined structures to redirect the blaze. Brandt called in by shortwave, voice cracking, sweat hissing off his mic, said the flames were throwing embers high. Some had already caught onto one of the compost sheds. I told him to cut it loose. He hesitated. That shed held the starter seeds for the next 2 rotations. He asked for a second opinion. Clara gave none. She simply shouted, "Burn it!" and severed the line with an axe. Back in the radio room, I opened all channels and began issuing priority directives. I called in the teams from Cliffwatch and the Mill Run fallback shelter, told Mila to update the wind maps based on the last NOAA patterns we still had on file. It wasn't much, just old climate data and speculation, but it was better than guessing. The first real breakthrough came from one of the new arrivals. Her name was Taryn, a former forestry officer from a southern co-op near Pueblo. She'd only been with us a few weeks, mostly tending solar banks and shadowing water logistics. But as soon as she saw the smoke, she took command of the ridge flank, used burn logic, set her own fire lines with soaked canvas and old gasoline-laced oil drums. The flame curved around her containment arc like it had been trained. For the first time in years, I saw strangers from different outposts working like one organism. No infighting, no second-guessing, just grit, purpose, the kind of synchronized survival that's only born from shared scars. The infected came in waves, silent at first, disoriented by the smoke, their silhouettes barely visible in the haze, twitching as their senses tried to reconcile the brightness and heat. Most didn't get far. Seema's perimeter line held. Any that breached it were driven back with pike poles or dropped into pit traps lined with broken rebar. We'd learned over time, if the body's still functioning, destroy the legs. Let the earth take care of the rest. Hours passed. The fire arced west, away from the main food stores and filtration systems. The solar bank sustained minor heat damage, but nothing critical. Losses were low, a handful of burns, a twisted knee, a cracked rib, but no deaths. Not this time. After the smoke thinned and the last embers turned to ash, the survivors gathered in front of the old blast doors. Brandt stood shirtless, arms charred with soot, the edge of his crowbar blackened. Clara leaned against the scaffold, blood dried into her shirt collar, but smiling. Actual smiles, the kind we hadn't seen since the days before the bunker fell. That's when the painting began. It wasn't my idea. Someone, I think it was Mila, brought out an old can of red industrial spray from salvage. She stared at the steel face of the main entrance for a long time, then climbed a ladder and began writing. The letters were uneven, staggered, but the message was clear. We respond. No fanfare, no speeches, just quiet nods and backs turned toward work. People moved back to their stations, their beds, their next tasks. I sat behind the mic and stared at that message long after the sun went down. There's something different now. A shift I can't explain. It's not that we believe we're safe. We're not. But there's trust in the response, in the act, in the motion of doing something instead of merely enduring. Signal landing is no longer a hiding place. It's a relay, a hub, a point on the map that others know they can reach. The paint on the door is still drying, and already we've had 2 new radio requests from outposts I hadn't heard from in over a year. One offered seeds, the other fuel cells. But both asked the same thing. Do you still have room? I don't know what we'll say tomorrow, but tonight, we say yes. The generator hums softer these days. Everything in here does. There's less strain on the battery cores, less heat from the cracked inverter. The old console no longer blinks with panic lights or skipped calibrations. It's quiet, worn down, but stable. I sit in the same chair I used when I was just an engineer with a toolbox and a checklist, when I thought the end of the world would come with sirens and broadcasts from Capitol Hill. It didn't. It came quietly, the way erosion eats through steel or mold spreads through canvas. 1 inch at a time, 1 trust at a time. That silence is deceptive, though. What we call peace now is just the absence of new emergencies. The systems don't scream because we've already reprogrammed our limits. What used to be a red alert is now a footnote. Danger isn't a flashing light anymore. It's a rusted cable, a warped airlock hinge, a knock on the outer hatch after curfew when no one was scheduled to return. I find myself keeping old habits, rechecking grounding paths, logging solar draw manually, even though the interface does it fine. There's comfort in routine, in scribbled data sheets and clipped wires. Maybe because it's one of the last things I still understand in full. One of the few areas where I don't second-guess myself. Out there, things change too fast. People change. But a failing capacitor still smells the same. A relay still clicks before it dies. Sometimes, I sit with the console powered off, just to feel the weight of the room as it is, not as it performs. This space was meant to be a fallback, a relay node. I've turned it into something else. Not quite sanctuary, not quite station. Something in between. Outside, the wind has shifted. I can smell it through the intake filters. Wet pine, ash, distant smoke. The kind of smoke that doesn't belong to a campfire. The kind that carries warnings from miles off. We keep a rotation now. Mila takes the first shift, then Brandt, then myself. I can't run like I used to, not since the leg, but I still listen better than most. And sometimes, that's all the difference in the world. Today is the 40th year since the outbreak. I'm not broadcasting for supply requests or network updates. I'm not reading from a NATO field manual. I'm not answering a distress ping from the Cheyenne relay. I'm not warning about red eyes or tracking the fire line or running frequencies on loop. I'm here to close a chapter. For anyone out there still scanning the bands, anyone digging through the frequencies of the old world like bones, this is Rowan Chambers. Once engineer, once wanderer, once caretaker of Hightower Estate, now just a man finishing his last transmission. The room smells like copper dust and old solder. Mila cleaned the terminals this morning. She's the one I trained to take over this console. Her handwriting's cleaner than mine. She logs every incoming call by hand in ink and carbon. She listens more than she speaks. I think she'll be better at this than I ever was. That matters. Legacy matters. Not the kind that builds statues or inks names into treaties. The kind that survives in decisions made when no one's watching. The kind you leave in the eyes of the people you taught how to survive without you. I wish I could tell you how many are left, not just here in Signal Landing, but anywhere. The signals we trace are scattered. Most don't repeat. Some are automated loops from ancient fire bases or relay trucks half swallowed by desert. We've mapped a few dozen communities, south past Pueblo, west through the canyon grid, one in the ruins of Salt Lake that speaks only in time-stamped weather codes. We've built trust with maybe 10 of them. We share water testing kits, seed rotations, radio plans. We even swap music sometimes. Scratched vinyl encoded through narrowband. It's not civilization, but it's not extinction either. This place, the bunker, once owned by a man whose name no one speaks anymore, has become something else. We call it Signal Landing now. That name came from one of the kids scrawled in charcoal on a door during winter rations. It stuck, and then we made it real. We've reinforced the outer walls with sheet metal and rebar lattices pulled from dead moles and shuttered mines. Our new antenna tower is welded from salvage cranes and windmill shafts. It hums when the wind hits it right, like a low drone reminding us that power still moves through the earth. We grow food in half-buried greenhouses. The geothermal taps Meredith ordered years ago still function, her final, brutal gift. Her room is sealed again. I left it the way I found it. Dusty, silent, filled with notes that no longer matter. I don't hate her anymore. What she did believing it was right. That doesn't make it forgivable, but it makes it understandable. I shot her once. I still see her face the moment before it happened. Shocked, not because I turned on her, but because I hadn't done it sooner. Guilt is a room with no exits, but you learn to pace it differently over the years. These days, I can't carry much. I can't climb like I used to. One good leg, one bad one pieced together with rebar and stubbornness. It limits your options. I can't go out on the long salvage treks anymore. And the fields, though beautiful, are rough on the joints. I've started sitting near the North Aqueduct when the mornings are quiet, with a line tied to a rod someone found in a half-burned bait shop. I used to hate fishing, thought it was boring, pointless. I never had the patience. But out here, with the wind in the valley and the glint of water against the sandbags, it's different. Sometimes I catch something, sometimes I don't. Either way, I sit and I listen. There's peace in the waiting now. Maybe that's what getting older gives you. Not wisdom, but the clarity to sit still and let the world move around you without needing to chase it. I never thought I'd fish, but there it is. Another strange chapter I never asked for, and maybe the one I needed. I leave these tapes now for anyone who may one day find them. Each is labeled and sorted. Survivor interviews, technical instructions, field notes, settlement coordinates, known infected behaviors, red-eye mutations, failed vaccine formulations, map files, and everything we learned the hard way. You'll find the defense strategies we developed, the flare grid patterns we used during the Ridge fire, the tripwire configurations Seema and Brandt built from gutted turbines. You'll find a whole shelf of my own voice, catalogued by date, sometimes cracked by weather, sometimes slurred by fever, but always trying, always trying. Mila will take over this room. She knows how to keep the transceiver from overheating. She knows when to switch to passive mode to avoid triangulation. She knows how to read between the silences. She's training 2 more now, Amos and Kiara. They're both young, both sharp. She says Kiara hears modulations even the scanner doesn't pick up. I like that. It means someone will still be listening after I'm gone. There are still monsters out there, infected that freeze when you look at them, ones that mimic the injured. We've mapped their behavior and shared it in every direction we can. Some call them red eyes, others nightfolds, and one kid from the Delta circuit calls them stillborns. The names don't matter. What matters is we know more than we did. We react faster. We waste less time doubting ourselves. And there are still people out there, not as many as there should be, but enough. They're rebuilding irrigation in sections of Nebraska. Someone near the Oregon line rigged a steam engine to power a radio post. In Arizona, an old Coast Guard vessel turned settlement has begun printing paper again. Letters, books, stories. They'll outlast any digital backup. I won't be around to see what comes next. My body's old and patched together with steel and stubbornness. The cold bites deeper each year. My hands shake in ways I can't fix with recycled vitamins. I sleep less. I remember more. Sometimes that balance flips and you feel like the past is louder than the present. So this will be my final voice on the line. If it reaches you, know this. We weren't the first here, and we won't be the last. But for a time, in the shadow of a dead world, we built something stubborn. Not perfect, not clean, but real. And it held. Through winter, fire, flood, and fracture, it held. The bunker is more than walls now. It's stories, tools, maps, and memory. It's proof that we didn't go quietly. This is Rowan Chambers, And this was signal landing. If you're out there, come find us. We're still here, still growing, still remembering. The world didn't end. It changed. And the infection, it doesn't get the final word. We believe in the next chapter. We believe in you. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.